Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Wilson. I am the Aniyahi Community Program Coordinator at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian. Today, we have with us Amy Walker, Mary Crow, and Charles Taylor to speak with us on corn and Cherokee identity. Our speakers will introduce themselves. They'll say their name, their community, and speak about themselves a little bit and what food sovereignty means to them. We will start with Amy Walker. She is our speaker on the left.
Hello, I'm Amy Walker, and I live on the 3,200 acre tract, which is part of the Birdtown community. I am an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. My mother is a full-blood Cherokee, and my father was Sioux from South Dakota, Rosebud. And when I grew up observing a lot of people coming to my home because of my mom and dad were herbalists, and they would come to our house together or to be able to get medicine. Sometimes it was because that they had been taking medicine from the medical doctors or the pharmacies, and it didn't work. So they would come to our house to get medicine. So I grew up seeing that. Well, at least until my father passed away when I was 10 years old. But all of those years that I remember, we always had gardens, and we canned food or dried food back then. And so I grew up in a time that we didn't have a lot of the things that we have today, like freezers, and a way of preserving foods that we have today. So things is a lot easier and more simpler in some ways in today's time. And so, but today I raise a garden and I grow our corn that we've had for centuries, as well as a green bean and some of our pumpkins or squash that is traditional to us as Native people. And so I do a lot of preparing the corn in different ways, like skinning corn for our community, the elders to be able to make hominy. And so this is a large part of my life since I retired. I'm a retired social worker. But I live my life as best I know how within the culture of our people here, my mother's people. And so this is the day today. Why I'm talking, why I want to help the people to understand my children for the next 7 generations to be able to know that this is what we did and what we had. But I look back at 7 generations before I was born, this community and this land has vastly changed. 7 generations ago, my mother people spoke Cherokee. They lived within their own cultural ways, life ways. And since then, there's been a huge change in the way that we live our lives today. And so I want, from 7 generations from today, from my life into the future, to be able to at least understand and know something about our culture. And but I'm hoping that this is they'll still be able to do some of the things that we're able to do today. That we'll have land and air, water, all of the things that's necessary to sustain life, that they will have that as well. Thank you.
Siya nagara, manikoga daw nawa. Hello, Diggy. Yes, go to Glennis. Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Crow from the Yellow Hill community, living on Peavine Road. I was born and raised here on the Qualla boundary. grew up with parents who were foster parents. They were one of the first foster parents here on the Quality Boundary. So I grew up with a lot of children in my family. And so food was a major component, of course, in our family, where my mother raised a garden, which we were all raised into and taught how to raise the garden. And then my father was also a gatherer and a hunter. And so growing up, my biological siblings and I, there's five of us, and we would go a lot with our mom and our dad, whether it was in the garden or whether it was up in these mountains. Right now we're gathering our wild spring greens, and in a couple of months we'll be going out and getting our berries, and then we'll be going into our gardens and doing what we need to do in our gardens, and then we'll go out in the fall and we'll start getting our fall um, nuts and gathering all of the things that we know what we've been raised to gather during the year. And so when I became a mother, those were one of the things that I was really hoping that I would be able to share with and teach my children. And I'm thankful that I'm able to do that in some aspect, as being a single widowed cancer survivor, mother of three. And so in 2020, I think was been the first time that we all got into my mother's garden, and my three children and a couple of my nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters, we all got in there and we started to remember those traditions, remember those songs, remember those prayers that we were told to give every time we would go out of our house, whether it was into the garden or whether it was into the woods, and acknowledge the area that was around us, because this is our subsistence here on the Quality Boundary. And food sovereignty, what we say is we are not sovereign until we can feed ourselves. And during COVID, we were able to feed ourselves. We had a lot of mutual aid going on, where when there was a family that was sick, other families would come and they would go either grocery shopping. We only had one grocery store, and we had a lot of relatives that couldn't travel off boundary. We had a lot of elders that couldn't travel off boundary. And so to have that one grocery store, was really important, for us here to understand why we need to continue to maintain, who we are as a Neoia, but more so, what are we to Elohim? And when we talk about Mother Earth and how we sustain ourselves, how Creator made all of us to be that one being on this creation, He created us all to live together, to sustain each other, and that's the water, the air, the fire, the animals, the people. That's everything that Creator made. But man thinks that we're better. And now we're in a situation right now in this lifetime, like Grandma talked about the 7 generations. We talk about the 7 generations behind us and the 7 generations before us. And we're the 7th generation today. Like Grandma said, we hope that what we share here in talking to you guys in the work that we've done and going out into other Native communities and seeing some struggles that they have. We have some communities that don't even have running water out west. It is into a major drought. These things are really serious things when we talk about climate change and how it affects us. One important note that I have to give out is that this is one of the last of the biodiverse areas in the world where they're still finding new species every year. Prior to COVID, there was a report that they found 20,000 new species in this area that's never been seen or known before. And to me, that's the mysteries of creation, and that's the mysteries of life. And so for us to talk about, life, we have to talk about what sustains us. And we need food. We need water. We need these things to keep us into this realm of life into what Creator would have us to be here on Mother Earth. And I hope that, we'll be able to, share a little bit of what, we've been able to work with over the last couple of years. And thank you for giving us this time.
Chio negada, dalaga toka. Discohia Tunkilosan, all the way get young. Hi, my name is Charles Taylor from the Birdtown community. I'm off of Adams Creek. That's where I was born and raised. Lived here on the reservation most of my growing up years, and then I went away to college. Moved on out into the world outside of the reservation and worked professionally in many realms of the clinical laboratory area. Worked for an in-house service here as well. Growing up here, I was exposed to a lot of cultural things with my grandparents. One was that my family in Birdtown, the Taylor people and the Welches and those people were very, very cultural and practiced a lot of traditions, traditional medicine, planting techniques, gathering, raised their own food, harvested what they could from the forest. Had a good experience with them. Learned a lot growing up when I was there. And then with my grandmother, she was from the snowbird community in Robbinsville. So that was the peace side of my family. And good people, wonderful people, good teachers. Most of them were Cherokee speakers and spoke limited English, a lot of them that I remember. And it was always a fun time to go visit those people because I always felt like going to visit my relatives in Snowbird and those places. They were unique. Not everybody lived the same life that they did. Everybody spoke Cherokee, nobody hardly spoke English. And I thought that was unique too. I thought everybody lived like that. Then come to find out later on in life, it was unique to those people. They're still our people. They live there in Snowbird. We still the one people. And I always learned a lot when I went down there. There was always something to see. Either something in the garden, walking along the stream, walking in the woods near their houses. There were plants. And always interesting to walk with them because when you walk with them, they would always point out something and show you something. They would tell you this is this plant, or this is good for a toothache. This is good for bellyache. I remember that. I always thought it's always was a learning experience to go with them into the forest. And I'll always cherish that, and I hope that the next generations to come will experience that as well. And it was so interesting, though, to think about that, and from a cultural perspective, that history itself, oral history, and the history of our people, as much has been told. I was fascinated with those people in particular, that there could be so much of the culture that you felt like was not intact. But then, whenever you began to listen to them real closely, you began to realize that it's very much alive. You would just take time to not only show an interest, but take it to heart and analyze what they're saying. And I remember that as a cultural experience being with my grandparents. And then, like I said, with my relatives too, always something to learn. Something to learn from them or let them show you something or demonstrate something. And they fervently would tell you that because they never wanted you to forget that. To them, it was real. To you, as the learner, they wanted you to always remember that, never forget that. I always thought that was unique. It is unique because it is unique to us. Unique to us. On the young, we young. On the looking. To those people who made that possible, it was a blessing to have learned as much as I did from them. Like I said, my greatest wish is that the future generations will take a fervent interest in that as well. Because not only will it perpetuate, be preserved. I hope that you all have an experience to explore our culture. Cherokee culture is very unique. And number one, ours. It belongs to us.
So for our first question, it's going to revolve around a television show that we're missing Miss Onita Bush, but the four of you together participated in. It can be found on Investigation or Discovery Plus. It's called From the Source, and they did an episode on corn. I watched it. I thought it was really well done, and it's easy to see why, with all of your knowledge and experience, why they reached out to the four of you. When the show was, when they were coming to you to make the show, how did they get in contact with you? What was their pitch? What made you want to participate?
When I was contacted about that, someone asked me, the people that were doing the production itself, they were interested in some people that were familiar with cultivation of corn, and then also like the gathering and harvesting of corn, the storage of it, and then the preparation of it to be used in food. And I was interested in that because, like I said, I had always been involved with that in my grandparents' house. You know, we always grew corn, we always raised corn, and had corn, used it for various purposes. We made hominy, skinned corn, as some people say. They'd pound it, make cornmeal out of the kernels, dry the kernels, parch the corn, eat roasting ears, whenever the corn was still green, and just various variation of techniques that were used to preserve the corn as a food item, considered a prize food. When they contacted us and wanted us to possibly participate, I was like, sure, I'd be glad to. And I think probably the driving force was behind that was not only the knowledge to gain from that, but also sharing the knowledge that I was by my family, my people, putting it forth, putting it to use, and put it into a record, a permanent record that can be stored for future generations. I felt that was key, and that was one of the most, probably the highlights of my interest in why I wanted to participate, but also it was paying homage to a beautiful culture and also a food source that has always been known to us, corn itself.
I have a nephew. My baby sister adopted Tyson Sampson when he was in high school. My sister's name is Patty. She has a son by the name of Zahe. So Zahe and Tyson were really good friends. And my sister Patty adopted him. And so I'm auntie to Tyson. And Tyson is very, very much involved in a lot of the cultural things that we do. And he and I have talked at different times. He and I go to the woods a lot, pick ramps, gather other herbs and stuff. And so, but I have always done that with my mom at a very early age. And so then I think it was the people got in touch with Tyson, and he asked me if I'd be willing to do that, and I said yes. And it is to preserve this information and for our culture and my grandchildren on to the next 7 generations. I have two grandchildren that one has graduated out of our immersion school, learn to speak English. The other one is 10 years old, and I'm not sure what grade he's in, but I think right now the school goes to the 6th grade. So he'll be there and speaking Cherokee and learning about our culture until he graduates, unless they can be able to put more grades into the program. But I have other grandchildren that doesn't have that opportunity to go to the immersion school. My mom didn't teach us children how to speak Cherokee. She was a Cherokee speaker, and she wanted us to learn as much as we could by speaking English so that we could function in today's society. She grew up in the boarding school. So where we lived, there was no boarding school. We lived over in Middle Tennessee, and so down in the Cumberland Valley. As far as I know of, we were the only native family that lived anywhere there close by. So we grew up in an all Anglo community, and so this is. We always had to raise our own food. We always had gardens, and so this is a part of what we did just to survive during the winter months. Gathered and canned a lot of different greens and vegetables that we raised in our garden. And so I had a job as a social worker, and then I retired. But before I retired, I had already started farming again. And I just knew that I had to farm and raise our corn and our beans. And so that is what I do now since I've been retired for approximately, I guess, 15 years. And over the years, my earlier years, I felt like a tumbleweed, just blown this way and that. I didn't feel rooted. I had no clue as to who I really was. And I went to Oklahoma to my first stomp dance ceremony. And that's where I began to learn about our culture. And that's where I decided that I would live our Cherokee values as best I knew how. And so over the years, I have picked it up and began to understand it on a deeper and deeper level. And so I realized whenever I was able to come back here to Cherokee and learn about who I was, and I began that journey at 29 years old. And so, Corn Woman is our first woman in our culture. And so that means that corn has a very, very special place in our lives. And I grow that corn because of that very reason. And I've learned to prepare the corn in different ways. But to be digging in the soil, putting the seeds in the earth, and working the corn as it grows and tending it and planting the beans and the pumpkins or squash amongst the corn is an old way of our people of planting and raising the corn. And so I might have tractors and other things to use to take care of my garden, but it is, I tell people it's my church because what I understand who we are as a people, uh, we are part of the soil, just like the trees and the animals and the birds. We're not separated from our environment. And whenever this physical body no longer works for us and we pass on, then our spirit goes back to the one who gave it. That's what I have come to learn and understand about it. And so this is why I do the things that I do. It nurtures me spiritually, emotionally, physically, and I get to cook the food and feed people. I love to cook our old way of cooking food. I learned that from my mom. And so these are the things that help me to understand and to take care of what the Creator has given and gives to all people, no matter where they live on this Mother Earth. We all have special plants and things that, no matter what culture we come from, we all have that. And certain things are very special to certain tribal people. And so for me, corn is one of the most special and wonderful uh, plant foods that we have here. And it's also can be medicine as well. And maybe I'll speak on that a little bit later. And I'll stop for the time being.
Certainly a perfect segue into our next series of questions, talking about how corn ties into Cherokee identity, both currently and historically, and why it's so important in our culture. I think we've all kind of touched on that, but if you guys want to answer a little more to that.
Well, when we look at where we're at today, and like we were talking about sustaining ourselves and how there's not many who don't have a garden, I should say. A lot of our communities and a lot of our people in our communities still have their own private gardens, which, I'm thankful. We used to have big community gardens back then. My dad used to tell me how Soco Valley used to be filled with corn and potatoes. You would go up to Big Cove and Sam Waddy would have his field of potatoes, and then you would go up in the woods would have, their garden spots over here with, the corn. And so as you would drive around into the communities and you would see a lot of our families are still practicing, creating and making and tending their own private gardens, which is good. One thing that we also see today in the work that I do in food sovereignty is that we have to look at where we're at in mass production of foods. And I was invited to former Vice President Al Gore's Climate Underground project, where he talked about how the underground soil is contaminated because of the overuse of fertilizers in these big fields and stuff. And then when we looked at what happened at COVID time, when all these big major corporate fields weren't for the people, it was for the businesses. And when the businesses shut down, there was a lot of food that got wasted because of that, because of how, the economy has gotten food, source as money. And so when you look at these things, and now you look at what's going on with the supply of food, the price of food, what's happening today, we have to understand that we as a community of people have to take who we are and what we are from our mother. And we are a matriarchal society, that we understand why we come from Mother Corn, Shaylu. I don't like the terminologies of calling our stories myths and legends because that English term makes them not real. But to me, they are real. That's our creation, and how we have to understand who we are, even during this COVID time. In our stories, it tells about, the plants that came and went into council when the animals, they were the first ones on Elohim, not us. It was the plants and the animals. And when the animals got mad at the humans and they brought diseases, right? And the plants went into council and they said, hey, we Creator doesn't want us to do that to each other. So let's go and say that whatever diseases the animals bring, there will be medicine, there will be a plant, there will be something there. So then when I started talking to my community and my kids, I told them, look what's going on with COVID. And when we talk about this place of being our medicine, we're not talking about the Western form of medicine where you get sick and you run to the hospital and they give you medicine, pills, whatever. We're talking about when you're raised in this aspect of going into the woods right now. All these spring greens that we're getting, the ramps, the sochan, the poke salad, everything that's up there. That's our proactive medicines that Creator made for our bodies, and we're supposed to take those things. Everything that was growing in these mountains is what sustains to our bodies. And so I had to tell my children the same with the animals that we ate. We didn't eat cows and pigs. We ate buffalo and deer, and we ate squirrel, and we ate wild turkey. We ate the animals that were here, that was our subsistence, that we knew was feeding in that circle of life. But when you have corporations that have pig farms down there, and you see what they're getting and how they're doing them, and then you see the chicken farms over here and how none of them chickens have ever touched the ground, let alone been out in the sun or anything. I mean, it makes you think of where we've gotten to a point of being acculturated and assimilated in a manner that we still are holding on to our cultural ways, our traditional ways, but we're confused about it, I feel. There's something that I think that, we have to have our elders to tell us, hey, it's okay. It's okay for you to do those things. Because for so long, even in boarding schools, we were told our traditional ways were not the right way. And so in the message that we are carrying, when you look at this panel right here and the generations that you have probably, the age limit here of knowledge that was handed down from, as you said, parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, relatives, that we all shared those things, and we still do it today. We just need to allow our communities to know that it's okay. It's okay for us to be who we are. And if you want to go down to the Oconee Lofty River and catch you a couple of trout to go with those ramps, that's our tradition. And so when we look at where we're at right now, the concerns that we have, when we talk about food sovereignty, that's who we are. We're only sovereign unless we can feed ourselves, and we can feed ourselves. We just have to understand that we have to maintain that, and we have to educate our young people and be able to allow them to know that, because things have been given that's made it so convenient. Things have been done that has made people so privileged and spoiled. When I hear somebody complain about sitting in the drive-thru for 15, 20 minutes and then they don't get the right meal through the drive-thru, right? And I'm sitting there going, the time that you did all that, you could have stayed at home and made you a biscuit, and a sausage biscuit within that same amount of time. But it made you get up and actually do something. Whereas you would rather go into a car and smoke up the atmosphere and wait in line and be angered and depressed because your coffee wasn't right and you get to work and you're not feeling good. I mean, these are some of the things that we have to start understanding as a people on how do we maintain our health and how do we maintain that understanding of our foods, from where we were back in our ancestors' lives to where we are right now, because we're still carrying on that traditional seed. We're still carrying on that traditional way, of the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. And so we need to continue to promote that as much as we can.
I would like to add to that some of what she's saying. The corn that I have, no seed company, I hope, ever gets a hold of this corn and hybridizes it. I had a friend who passed away about 3 years ago. She had bought some corn and seeds from the hardware store, and throwed it out in her front yard over the winter to feed the birds and the squirrels, guess what? The animals and the birds would not eat that corn. It had no value to it. And so these are the kinds of things that we have to do too, is to be sure that our heritage plants are kept safe. The one company went over to India and gave the farmers over there new seed. The next year, those little farmers who had little garden plots found out that you couldn't use that seed. You couldn't replant it. So they were supposed to have bought seeds from this company. And so India ran that whole company totally out of the country because it wasn't working for those people who had their own seeds that they've had for centuries and centuries and could replant it. And that's the place that we're in today. And so it's, when I share my seeds with different individuals, I'll give it to enroll members who ask for it, but I warn them, do not let just anybody have this seed because they're going to ruin it. And so this is a big part of taking care of what we do have, what we've ended up having today. And correct me if I'm wrong, but over 60% of the food that people eat around the world came from this continent, from North, Central, and South America. Over 60% is feeding the world today. And so we have to protect what we do have.
One thing that we're really wanting folks to understand is the difference between our heirloom seeds, our traditional seeds, and then what they call the genetic modification, GMOs. And just like Grandma Amy said, we were told that if the animals won't eat it, you shouldn't eat it either, right? And so, when you hear those things, they are true. They even do the experiment with that McDonald's burger. They set it up on a shelf and it never got molded, disintegrated, and never. So, but these are serious things that when you look at that processed food that we were forced to eat, and it started with forcing us to take, commodity government issued foods, that took us away from our traditional and then like put us into grocery stores, to put us into, to make us think, that's what we had to depend on. But we don't have to. We've been depending on what we've been taught for generations upon generations since millennia.
When I think of corn, I like to think of the historical perspective of it. It's a beautiful story how, the first Cherokee woman came into existence, into their culture, history. They called her Shaylu. And today, presently, that's what we know corn as, Shaylu. Originally, it was the name of the first Cherokee woman. I think that is unique because that not only names the first grandma and the first mother. And if we're being matriarchal, as they say that we are in our lineage and our descent, how we descend upon this earth as Cherokee people, we owe our reverence and our existence to those two people, your grandmother and your mother. Those are the two most significant people to you. And that establishes, the matriarchal descent in itself for you from that point on. So with the conception of Shaylu being the first woman, I always think of that. I think that is so neat how someone formulated that, how someone explained that, being the first woman, and then it being sacred enough to be named Shaylu at one point, a being that became a food item, and it was given that name. That name is held in high honor and is sacred in our culture, and it's a sacred name, Shaylu. And today we call that corn that we gather. We call that shake. And in Cherokee conversation too, people refer to the food item as shayla when they talk about corn, right? Corn, roasted ears, any of that. But I also like to think, I never thought of that until one day I was walking around in a garden. I was looking at, we was gathering corn blades to make chestnut bread and bean bread. And I got to thinking about that. I thought, Shaylu, all this Shaylu here. But I thought Shaylu began with the first Cherokee woman. And I thought, then that was your grandma, that was your mama, that was your aunt, your mama's sisters, all of them. And I said, they're all matriarchal. And I said, with that also, that came along the clans and how that you descend out of the clans in that matriarchal descent. All be traced back to that first grandma, that first mother that gave birth to you as a Cherokee. I often thought of that. I thought, from a historical perspective, I thought, that's a beautiful concept. I thought someone really, really thought that out. But also I said, now we take it a couple of hundred years, thousands of years, since the beginning of time and the evolution of our people. That name has remained what it was. It's the first woman, Shaylu. Now it's the corn, and it's the food item, Shaylu itself. And the unique thing about that too, about corn also, is that corn can be prepared in several ways. You can eat it raw, roasted here. You can roast it, toast it, make parched corn. You can fry it.
Grit bread.
You can make gritted bread. You can dry it out, pound it into meal, make cornmeal in that, make dumplings from it. It can be prepared in so many ways. And the corn, dried in its form, as long as it's protected from moisture in a container that will protect it from moisture, can be reserved for eons. It'll remain the same. So I thought of that too. That probably that was a very important staple food to the early Cherokee people, was that it can be prepared in so many ways, but also it can be stored for long term. Anthropologists have discovered corn in caves and archaeological sites. Remnants of corn itself. It can survive the test of time. But I also like to think of it in Cherokee historical perspective. That was the first grandma, the first mom, the first women. The establishment of our Cherokee lineage, of who we became, the existence of it is held in the matriarchal origin and descent, and how that's delineated into who we became, Cherokee people. If you want to think of it in a historical perspective, as such. Shaylu, a very sacred name, beautiful concept to our people.
I would like to add, if I may, my brother was married to a Navajo lady, Dene woman. Virginia was her name. And I'm going to cry. He described how the Dene people use corn pollen in their ceremony. And he said that when you got your stalk of corn and then all of that pollen, when it fell down on the silk of the corn to make the ear of corn, that was how that the corn was able to make the kernels. And then whenever the corn got hard and you could shell it, then that little shiny part that's over each grain prepares that that grain of corn to be the next, to feed the next year, to plant and grow and give more corn the next year, which is like us women. I was in my grandmother's womb when my mother was growing as a child inside of her, so that I could be born to be me. my daughter that passed away about 18, 19 months ago from cancer. She painted a turtle with a egg inside of the turtle that had a baby female turtle. But inside that female, there was the egg for the unborn female to produce new life. And so you can see that same story in a lot, or truths, I should say, in the same way in a lot of the food that we have, whether it be animals or plants. It's that same description can be done in the same way. And even the seasons. Right now, we've been in a winter time, and a lot of people's had bad colds. And so the first thing that comes up is our ramp, and it cleans out our system. So even the seasons and the foods that come at the different seasons helps us and the animals, if it's nuts in the fall or whatever it is, this whole system of the universe, sun and the moon and the earth, and all of those things work together like this. You cannot remove any part of that circle of life without it throwing so many other things out of kilter. And right now they're talking about how they're cutting down the forests down in South America. That's the lungs of Mother Earth that provides the air that we breathe. And so then what we breathe off, we breathe in from the trees, and then the trees need what we breathe off to continue. So there's that interrelationship just with that one thing when we talk about air, oxygen. And so, but if you think about trees and what else they produce, they give home for different birds and animals to live. They provide food for them. It provides wood for us to build homes out of, or to build a fire in our stove. But it also takes care of the earth so that the earth don't, or the dirt and soil don't wash away into the rivers. And some has fruit of all kinds. And who is it that wrote that poem about something as lovely as a tree? So if you just think about any just that, the trees, how many things that depend upon the trees that walk upon this earth or live upon this earth, our mother. And it needs the sun and the moon and the earth in order to produce and to live just like we do. And so here we are. We talk about the moon. Women monthly, we have our moon time, and of course the moon not only has something to do with that, but also the ocean currents in the ocean or the waves. And so what else does the moon do? I don't know. I'm not that smart. But these are the things that, this is our culture. And our culture is built upon this understanding that we're not separate from all that is. We are just a part of it. And whenever this body no longer lives, it goes back to the earth where it came from. But the spirit, it goes back to the one who gave it, which is that energy force that created all things, that it would not be without this creative inner force that probably every culture has a name for it. They understood that. And we live within that context of the ebb and flow of the seasons, the daytime and the nighttime, all of those things in the different animals and birds that live. They have their thing. Some come out at night, some come out in the day. But it's all interrelated like this. And if we do not change the way that we're doing things, there may not be much for those that's coming after us to enjoy.
One point I would like to make is like it's very interesting that when you look at our culture and the different aspects of it, how everything interweaves, like Shaylu and Kanadi into our everyday lives and our gender roles. Traditionally, women were the farmers, the providers of our main source of food because corn was at the center of it all. It was the main part of our diet because we didn't have things like wheat, so it came from corn. And how it all revolved around the idea of tohi and balance, and how men and women balanced each other, and so did our roles within our everyday lives. This leads into my next question. Um, you know, maintaining traditional foods, and traditional foodways are important to maintaining culture and identity. And it's a way, I think, for people to reconnect. What sort of ideas do you have about that, and what advice would you have for someone looking to reconnect in that way?
When I think in that perspective, then I think of, as Cherokee people, we love corn. We like to eat shit. Like I said, roasting ears. We like hominy. People like hominy and beans. People like fried corn. They like to make gritted bread. Several of those items. Every generation that you talk to, most kids know what a bean dumpling is. They know that the ingredients are cornmeal, raw ingredients cornmeal, and then roasting ears. Everybody likes corn, fixed and prepared in that manner, and then Cherokee too. Anytime there's a gathering, whether it be a public event, benefit, or you know, paying respect to a person who has passed away, oh, let's make some corned beans and hominy. Walnut. Make some of that. Everybody knows what that is from the inception of the idea, probably in the beginning with our ancestral people, till now. When I was a kid, those were common. Hominy was common. Parched corn was common. Roasted ears were common. Some people liked sweet corn. Some people liked the older people. I remember the elders. They liked the roasted ears that were flour corn. And flour corn as a roasting ear has a short period. Don't stay in the roasting ear phase very long. Immediately gets hard. It starts to get hard, and you have to catch them at the right time. I remember my grandmother. I was like, "How do you eat that? That's a roasting, but they're not sweet." She said, "No, they're not sweet, but they taste good." She said, "I like the flavor." So, and then she would take that, and then I remember she would take her gritter and get the roasting ear, flour and roasting ears like that, get the corn itself, and make gritted. And I remember how good that was. Everybody knows what gritted is too. Grandma used to make that. My aunt used to make that. My mama made that. And those cultural food items, I think, in itself, when you hear people say, I know what that is, or I know how that tastes, or I know that some people like roasting ears from flour, some people like it from sweet. It is a common thing, I think, amongst our people to know that we all have our likes of corn, and we're all familiar with the various styles of corn, how it's prepared, and the various varieties of corn and how they're prepared. It seems like that knowledge has always been passed down. As a child, I remember hearing it from the old people. Those old people are dead and gone. As I grew older, I heard different families talking about corn and corn being prepared in this manner that I was familiar with. I'm like, I remember that. I remember how that tastes. That tastes good. So it perpetuates itself also with, I think, with the savoriness of it. But I think also its tradition is that our people relished corn in its various phases at various times of the season. You know, from the time it was in the field to when it was in the mortar being ground at the mill to being placed in ashes and boiled to make hominy. Everyone seemed to have knowledge of that. That seems to have perpetuated through the years, and I think that because of the savouriness, the various styles of how it's prepared and how the various dishes are made, people liked that and enjoyed that. So it became historical that, hey, we're going to teach this generation to make it. They're going to teach the next generation because it's an enjoyable food. We like it. But also, if you think about it, it brings our families together too. Anytime we have a dinner in the summertime, there's roasting ears. Somebody will fry corn, or somebody will bring hominy and beans, and there's always corn. Remember, any time of the year. So it's just like it becomes historical in that respect because number one, it tastes good. Then number two, there will always be someone around that will fix that. And then also, I think also it also prepares a spot, a unique commune that has always been maintained by it. They come together, we get everybody together. What do we want to do? We want something good to eat. Most of the time, it's usually bean dumplings, hominy and beans, or fried corn, gritted bread, any of them. You think about it. It's usually put on the table for our families, if not for our families, for the community, or our friends. It brings community. It brings us together. That's what I like.
One thing that I'd like to point out is when we go and do these types of events, there's one thing that we want to explain is that we hope that somewhere down the road a kid's scrolling on his phone and he comes across those videos like they do, because you know what? They got to the point now where they will go to that phone and they'll scroll through and find something on YouTube or whatever, and they'll take it for true. They'll watch it, the videos forever. And then they'll come and say, "Hey, Mom, check this out. This person over here built this, whatever. And I seen it on YouTube." So I'm hoping that the kids see this on YouTube or see this somewhere down the road, and they might get a sparked interest in it, and it might lead them to something else. But that's one aspect. Another is what I'm seeing today is the thirst that our young people have that want to know it. And I say that because, excuse me, my children are 25, 23, and 21. And like I said, in 2020, I said, "Hey, let's get in Mom's garden." And I, honestly, I didn't think they would, because I told them, I said, "It's work." I said, "It's work. We're going to have to go down there and clean it off. It's in January. We're going to do Mom's garden. This is what we got to do. We got to start now." And so they did. And I think when they realized, seeing it grow in the manner that it did, going and remembering their grandma, my mother, taking them in their garden as children, they talked and reminisced a lot about that. But my son's 6'4", and when our corn seed that grandma blessed us with, the stalks were almost over 8 feet tall, he couldn't stop beaming how proud he was. And then when we pulled that vine back and we seen that 15-pound pumpkin squash, and it was like his child. He Mom, look, and he was just so happy. He was almost ready to cry. How beautiful all the squash was. It just blew up. I mean, the squash went this way. The beans were so heavy it knocked down our line for our bean poles and everything, and they just spread out and got into the corn stalks, which we're supposed to do corn, beans and squash, and it overtook everything because it was so much. And then we were able to tell relatives, hey, come get it. Whatever you can get them beans. Because, when it knocked it down, we had to get them up because it was heavy. There were so many vines to get up because I said if we don't, then they're going to get moldy and they're going to go bad and we can't let these go bad. There were so many. And so whenever we were able to bring it home and like I said, to eat that first squash and to eat those first ears of corn, as a family going in, pairing it, like Penny Henny, who's going to help me, hoe the corn and who's going to help me, do this. And that's what it takes. It takes everybody to have a duty and a responsibility to come together in that garden. And I'm glad that my children are able to experience that and to have such a good success in that. And I even told them there's many times when that garden wasn't successful, when there was a drought, or when a big storm did come and take, the stalks out or whatever. There was a couple of times I told them that, it broke my mom's heart when something happened and our garden just didn't grow. For some reason, that garden didn't grow. And those prayers that they would say are those, as they said, them old wives' tales. I said, no, those aren't wives' tales. Those are our relatives telling us something. Maybe we didn't go in with the right heart. Maybe we didn't come in together into that garden like we're supposed to in that good way. Because that's what we were told. Is that when we coming in together like that, we got to make sure we're good. Both, in our minds and our hearts and our souls, because this is spiritual. It's spiritual. When we go into that garden, that's how I was taught by my mom. To sing those songs, to say those prayers. It wasn't nothing special. It was just my mom telling us, whatever you feel coming into your heart, sing it. Whatever you feel, coming into your heart, pray it. It wasn't nothing special. It was just something that she taught us as a way of having that respect and that honor and that humbleness in what we were getting ready to undertake, because it is a lot of work. We could have got overwhelmed and quit, and then our garden would have been covered up by weeds, and then everything would have been overtaken, because it is a lot of work. And I think that's, like I said, we've gotten to the point in today's society that everything's so convenient. And we would rather give that child a iPhone or an iPad and let him sit on that corner for, an hour or so, instead of taking that child by the hand and taking them outside and teaching them something for an hour and a half. And you'll be surprised things that you hear from children when you're out there with them, the questions that they have. And so when we look at where we're at today and how, I hope that these things, are allowed to be seen, when I'm no longer here. And to be able to hopefully spark somebody's interest and understanding and know it's okay to be who we are as a Neonia. It's okay for us to do what we've been born to do, because we are special. We are unique, because there's not that many of us. We're in the whole wide world, as they say. I tell my kids there's 17,000 Eastern Band Cherokee Indians in the whole wide world. In the whole wide world. And that's unique. We're in a place where when people from all over the world come here and they tell me that this is like the Garden of Eden, or this is the mystical forest, especially when the lightning bugs are out. Our relatives that come from away, when they come here, they're amazed at how much water and how much green is here. And so we're blessed. And so I hope that, this will help our relatives and our people out there and our visitors to understand, to have that respect, for this area and what Creator has blessed us with.
I'd like to say that where I garden down at the Mother Town land, right above me on the hill, is the Mother Town Garden for those who have gone for treatment and gotten sober. They that's just a very powerful uh, place for them to get back grounded, is to dig into the soil and to plant and to take care of those plants that they put into that garden there. And they feed the elk. The elk are down there. But there's, excuse me, there's a lot of other people who come through there. But I think what they do, I think I've saw them down there about twice. And I've stopped and talked to some of them one time. I even got on a little bus they were on and just talked about who they were and how important that they are and the value that we all have that value. Took me a long time. One of the men at the stomp dance said that had a statement one evening, and I thought and thought, what is it about us that gives us all value? And it took me, I'm going to guess, 2 years of looking at different things that each one of us do or are, and then I realized the value comes from that spirit that abides within us. Not only does it abide within us, we are that spirit, having a human experience here in this lifetime. That's the value that everything has. Not only just us two-legged, but everything that is has value, and we are required to honor it and take care of it. To me, love and respect is the same thing. So when we respect one another, we won't have drug addictions anymore. We won't have mental illnesses anymore. That's a medicine that, and I think that those of us who can be able to share that with one another and to live it, but we have to live it and always be in touch with our, I think we up here, we have the ability to forget about what gives us life. But once we turn that around and see us as being spirits, having a human experience, then we have to change the way we treat one another. And I have a sister that talks about multi-generational trauma. The first people that came here from Europe on ships were emptied out of the jails and off the streets. Some of them were sent to Australia. But they weren't taught that. They didn't learn that. In fact, the people who had over there in Europe, they wanted to get rid of the ones that were homeless and out on the streets or in the jail. And so they came over here and treated us just like they had been treated. They didn't have any other knowledge about how to be respectful. And then there were those who came because they wanted to worship differently. And they relegated us to reservations. And our ancestors made a choice to stay here and take care of this mother town village, which was the very first one of us Cherokees. And as the Cherokee tribes grew, then they spread out to Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. That is the land that the Cherokee people lived on before the coming of the Europeans. But then, whenever they began to take our children and put them in boarding school, this is what we're dealing with today, and we we can heal from that. I know I heal my anger at Andrew Jackson. My mother taught me to hate a dead man because he was president whenever they moved the Cherokees west. I didn't realize how deeply that affected me. One day I knew that I had to let that anger and hate go. And so it's about cleaning out. I call this in here my garden, pulling the weeds out of it, the resentment, the fears, to be at peace. And it's been a lifetime of work for me. And working in that garden nurtures that part of me that needs to be nurtured. And so when I eat my food, I know I have clean food. I don't spray poison on it. I take care of it in the best loving way. And now I've got people who comes from all over to help me in my garden because my daughter ordered Tyson, you take care of Mama's garden while I'm in hospice. You take care of this person over here when I'm no longer here. She gave some of her cousins and her best friends somebody to take care of these different people that she supported and loved and talked to when she can no longer go anywhere. And she became bedfast. But she gave everybody a job. And so my nephew Tyson brings people from Asheville, north of Asheville, east of Asheville. And now there's a list going around of people who want to take help in my garden because the feeling, the energy that is there is from our ancestors that has lived there for centuries. And that there was to be no bloodshed in that village. Never. And so this is where that we have our Mother Town Garden for those who are getting sober. And maybe some of them now that's gone through that program and now have their own gardens and are being sober. Maybe you can find some of them and talk to them. See what they have to say. Because they're raising their own children now. And these things has to be nurtured and by each one of us in whatever way that we know how. So that's the crux of why I'm doing this today. It brings me here to tell people that there is hope and that there is people who can support and heal this community.
I was actually part of the team that created the Mothertown Healing Project, and part of our goals were to reconnect people in recovery with the land and culture and provide them with a sense of accomplishment when they were able to harvest this food that they had grown from fields that they had tilled and prepared. And I'm glad to see that it's still working and it's still functional and that it's still helping people, because there is, in all Native communities across the country and into Canada, we're dealing with that intergenerational trauma from where our family members went to boarding school. My grandfather went through one, and my mother was born about 10 years after it was like mandatory when they would come here and force our children into these wagons and vehicles and force them into these schools. People think it's so far removed, but it's not, and that's why the effects are felt so strongly still.
One thing that I remember growing up when I was a child was being in the garden when it was like the garden was plowed and this ready to plant crops, things in the garden. It was also a time for learning too. also to learn how to plant, but to listen to those people that were in the garden, planting things, working the soil, doing all of that. You would hear things like Uncle Uncle so and so did this, or Aunt so and so made her cornrows. She put her beans over here, or she planted this next to this. You would learn from that. I would listen to those old people talk. They would talk about that, put it here or put it there. And I remember when we were kids too, when the elder people would come to visit, relatives come to see our family. We were never allowed to sit and listen to the conversation. Then we had to get a basket and go outside, go to the garden and pick something, and get something out of the garden. By the time we'd get back to the house and set the basket on the porch, it was time for the guests to leave, or they were leaving. But you sent that home with them. We were never allowed to listen to that, but we would pick things in the garden. Grandpa would say, put it in a bag or set it right there. So when they get ready to go home, then they can take it with them. We would learn that. But also, I was going to remember my great great aunt when she was still alive. She was a well known basket maker, lived in Bird. And I remember when we went down there that one time to visit. She's usually sitting on the porch. She was out in the garden. They had plowed her garden. I thought it was so cool because there was this lady, older Cherokee woman, had her hair tied back, had a scarf on her head, long dress, an apron, old blouse, like old jinkum, however you say that word, clothing, cloth, jinkum, cloth, um, and no shoes, barefoot. She was always barefoot. But there she was out there in that garden, and somebody had cut her a row in that garden. That woman went through there, and I was watching. She had it looked like a bandolier bag over her shoulder, had her seed corn, her flower corn. She went through there, and she had a pole about that big, very long. She'd go through there, and she'd space it, take that post, go like that, make a hole, take two or three kernels, drop them in there. Take one foot, that bare foot, and rake that dirt with her foot like a hand, like it was her hand. And then she would cover it up. She'd move on so many steps, and then take that post, do that all the way through, and do it all the way back till that corn was planted. And then she got back to the porch. She said, "Well, now I'll rest." And then she said, "Now we'll ask for rain. We want it to rain so that can drink and grow." I remember her saying that. Then one time we went down her house. We was down there, and she wasn't on the porch. She wasn't sitting on the porch. She was out behind the house, right on the edge of the house there. Had the canona out, had it cleaned up. And there she was. She was grinding her cornmeal to make. She was gonna make bread. She went down there and she was just pounding corn, just pounding away, working on it. She didn't stop. She told us to gather in and sit down. And we sat there while she did that. And then my grandma helped her finish pounding corn dough. She was talking the whole time. She didn't stop. I'll always remember that. And barefooted too. She didn't have no shoes on. But I remember seeing that as a child. And like I said, I was left the impression too that I thought everyone lived like that. I thought everybody. I didn't realize that later on in life that it was only a few people that perpetuated. For them, that was the way of life. They didn't have a lot of money to go to the store. They prepared their own food. They raised it. Corn was one of them. They always had an ample supply of corn, plentiful corn to do through the winter, the off season when they weren't raising it in the garden till the next spring when they could start planting again. The garden again. I'll always remember that as long as I'm here. I remember.
But you always fed people whenever they come to your home. back then, I remember when I first moved back here, my Aunt Margaret always had food on the old wood stove. And no matter what time or who came, you fed them. You gave them something to eat. Nowadays, people, if they got food, they want you to leave before they eat. Certain individuals, but I just remember my mom always feeding people, and that's my joy too. I love to cook for people and share my food because to me that is loving them and caring for their needs. Can we take a break?
Yeah, I was actually, we are coming up on an hour and a half, so we can actually come to a conclusion if you guys would like.
Yeah, we can do
Is
that.
Is there anything else on that list that you had?
No, and my died.
Anything in particular, one area that you wanted to hit, maybe close with
Just
We'll have to do it again sometime. Carry on the
Anytime.
conversation.
just as our closing remarks, I guess how food and community are so integral to Cherokee culture. If you guys would like to touch on that one last time, and then we can come to a conclusion on this lecture event. I want to just go ahead and thank you guys for joining us and sharing everything that you have with us.
One of my nephews, he was laughing when they were on travel. There was one of these youth events, and they were walking down the street, and he's a big nephew, you know. And this guy came up and says, "Hey, are you guys native?" And my boy said, "Yeah." And they said, "I bet you eat a lot of bear, huh?" And my boy said, "Yeah." And I guess that guy wasn't expecting them to say that. And he went, "Wait, what? Do you really eat bear?" And my son and my nephew was like, "Yeah." You know, I mean, you go home up to my house, there's a bear roast, there's some, wild pig sausage, there's some, deer steaks, I mean, that's just stuff that we had, the things that we we were raised with that, not too many people can go to the freezer right now and find wild meat, but it's in abundance here. We have to preserve it, we have to conserve it, we have to protect it. These are some of the things that we want to, explain to our people the understanding that we have to relearn because for so long we didn't understand. And so we when we talk to our people today, I have to remind myself, a lot of this was taken away. A lot of this knowledge and a lot of these teachings were taken away. And I had one relative because I used to say, our traditions and our culture and our ways are lost. And I had this one brother come up and he said, no, he said, your traditions and your culture and your ways, they're not lost. You are. You're the one that's lost. I went, oh, you're right. Yeah, because of what? Because that understanding. Like I said, even though I was blessed with my parents that kept those traditions and shared those with me, and like I said, to be able to give that to my children now, there's a lot of our families out there that don't have that, and so I have to remind myself that I can't assume that everybody does do that. But I do see a lot of our Cherokee people, still practicing our traditional ways. And I see a lot of our young people that are just thirsty for that knowledge. and that understanding. And I hope that, in the future we'll be able to do, more of these. I'm glad to see these classes coming up, to create ribbon skirts, to go back to our traditional dances, to go back to do those things. So that allows me to know that our people are thirsty for it. And we just gotta, like I said, allow our elders and our people that have that knowledge to know it's okay to share it. Because for a long time they were told that it wasn't. And we still have a lot of that, if we practice our traditional ways. And so, yeah, hope that everyone, starts understanding what we need to do in preserving and conserving who we are, but more so how do we, carry it on into the next 7 generations.
I'd just like to say that those of us who know this and understand it, um, we need to continue to do it in the only and best way that we know how. And I know that someone they try to speak Cherokee, a Cherokee speaker or somebody will sort of laugh at them or say, "No, you did that wrong." They should support them and help them to understand this is the way you say it. But language changed. When I grew up, gay meant you were happy. That's not the same term that is used the same way today. And so things do change. But I think that for me, I had no understanding about who I was until I was 47 years old. And I talked about feeling like a tumbleweed. I thought I had to act like the Anglo culture, but it never fit. I did not know who I was. And the psychologist will tell you that in order for us to find our grounding and find our place to be rooted, we have to know who we are. And I am not an Anglo person. Never was, never will. When my daughter passed on her obituary, she said, make sure at the bottom of it says, I leave this world a uh, colonized, a non-colonized person or Indian. I don't know. I don't remember it. I haven't read it lately. But she wanted people to know that she knew who she was in her traditional way. And she stood in council and spoke for the people. That if you're going to make a decision about doing something in this community, make sure that we all are included in that and that we can benefit from it. That's our cultural way. And so, um, and so when she left, she just said, do this ceremony. And it was a powerful, powerful ceremony that she had. So she said, do it on the day that my body passes. And no, that's what we did. Powerful. Even the elk came. I'm deer clan. And the elk came out of the cornfield and danced. Walked up on the mound of where our ancestors had prayed for centuries and centuries. Turned around and looked at all of us for probably a minute, 2 minutes, and turned around and walked off towards the river. But uh, this is what I would love for all of our people to know is that to be Cherokee means that we live this way and we support one another in every way that we possibly can, and we share the food. No one here should be hungry ever. No one should.
Take perspective like that. Covered most of the grounds of that talked about, early origins, the history as it was established, or how it came about, things that we believe in, things that we've always believed in, and the things that we want to carry on. And I think that that is important too in our ever-changing society. And um, there's just so many distractions that can impede a person's learning, draw them away from what was considered to be original amongst our people. And I just think that in this day and time, every effort should be made to preserve and protect what we know. If it means recording it on the film, putting it out there for the next generation to have, then so be it. I think of that in my respect too, because there's been a lot that I have been told too. I remember a lot of it. Those people, I have to remind myself, Grandma's not here, Grandpa's not here, Aunt so and so's not here, Uncle so and so's not here. I can't go back and ask them if that's correct. I just have to rely heavily on what I was told and under what circumstances I was told, and recall from memory what they said. Or, in my lifetime, I'm like, that's why Grandpa said that. That's why Grandma said that. Now it makes sense. But I don't have Grandma and Grandpa around to validate if that was so. The virtue of it revealed it. But yet, the foundation for me to understand it was already established when they told it to me. Then the realization was when I experienced it. Like I said, I didn't have Grandma and Grandpa. They're not here no more to go back and ask them, is that so? Or is that what you told me? They're not here. So, I have to stick with what I heard, and I'm like, you'll get your answer. If you want that, if you need that answer, it always has. But in the day when our culture can dwindle, traditions have dwindled, ancient ways, ancient practices are dwindling, we need to do everything we can to preserve that. Because even if it is just a remnant of what it once was, what we once knew, what we held and what we valued, what our ancestors held and valued, even if it's just a fragment, it is still there to perpetuate. It's still ours. We still own it. So I think the takeaway from that is is that do everything you can with what you know to protect. Let it be lost. Don't let that
Thank you all for joining us today. Again, thank you for giving us your knowledge and your words today. I think a theme throughout all the lectures that we've done is that with these ideas and these practices, they do need to be protected, and that we as Cherokee people have a gift to adapt these ideas to our current times and take what is old and make it new, or just keep it alive. But I think that will conclude our lecture on corn and Cherokee identity. Our next lecture will be virtual as well, and it will be on May